Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. So, this afternoon we're going to talk about the oldest biblical manuscript ever discovered to date. We did mention earlier, as a way of review, that our English Bible is the result of translating ancient manuscripts that have come to us from the past. The golden age of manuscript discoveries was in the late 19th and early 20th centuries for New Testament text. Today we're talking about an Old Testament text or Hebrew Bible text. Discoveries of these texts have been found in a number of different locations. For example, they have been unearthed in planned archaeological excavations. And the case today that we're talking about fits this description. Ancient biblical manuscripts have also been found in caves in the Judean desert, for example. The Dead Sea Scrolls is our primary example. But even as recently as 2019, the Dead Sea Scrolls have continued to yield some results. Ancient biblical manuscripts have also been found in storerooms of monasteries, such as St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai, Mount Athos in Greece, and others. Old Testament texts have been found in, for example, the Cairo Geniza, or Geniza, tomato. And a Geniza is a storeroom where worn out, outdated, perhaps damaged through use, Torah texts were taken to a storeroom called a Geniza, put away, and then newer texts could be used in their place. The story of the Cairo Geniza is quite an interesting story. Maybe we'll devote an episode to that. But in addition, ancient biblical texts have been found in city garbage dumps. The prime example of this is the Oxyrhynchus papyri find. Again, papyri, tomato, in Egypt. And those two young Oxford scholars, Grenfell and Hunt, unearthed thousands upon thousands of those Greek papyri. Those are just a few of the places where ancient biblical manuscripts have been discovered. Today, we devote ourselves to talking about the Silver Scrolls. So as an overview, they're also known as the Ketef Hinnom amulets, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. They were found in Jerusalem at a grave site near St. Andrew's Church of Scotland, about a mile southwest of the old city walls. There, in fact, have been determined to be amulets to be worn either around the neck or perhaps on the arm, but the wearer knew what was inscribed, and it was to ward off evil spirits and to keep one protected. There were two tiny scrolls found in 1979 in chamber 25 of cave 24 at Ketef Hinnom. During excavations conducted by a team under the direction of Dr. Gabriel Barkay, the Hinnom Professor of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. They're the oldest known citation of a Hebrew Bible text and are dated by Dr. Barkay and his team to about the mid-7th century before Christ. The dating is based on the archaeological context in which they were found, as well as the determination of the Paleo-Hebrew script, or the Old Hebrew script, that indicated is 7th century dating. These two tiny silver scrolls are made of thin, rolled up silver sheets, the larger measuring about 1 inch wide and the smaller only about 1 1/2 inches long, about 1/2 inch wide. When they were finally unrolled, the larger came to a length of about 4 inches. Now, would you believe that we owe it to a young teenage boy to find this oldest biblical text? It's true, but the story does involve so much more context. So let's begin. Dr. Gabriel Barkay, professor of archaeology at Tel Aviv University, was convinced there was much to learn from the area around Ketef Hinnom. This area is adjacent to St. Andrew's Church, and it's also where the Valley of Rephaim and the Valley of Hinnom meet on the old road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And so it was in 1979 that Dr. Barkay was granted a small budget from Tel Aviv University to work in the Ketef Hinnom area. And among his volunteers were a group of 12 to 13-year-old kids from an archaeology club in Tel Aviv. And they were there to assist him in the excavation of these burial caves. One of the helpers and the volunteers was a young 13-year-old boy. His name is Nathan, who was becoming quite a nuisance to Dr. Barkay, continually tugging on his shirt, asking questions, making a request, and frankly annoying Dr. Barkay. So Dr. Barkay thought to himself, how can I get rid of this kid? So he sent him to clean up a burial cave nearby, hoping that he would no longer be a distraction to him. Nathan did as he was told and went to work, cleaning the surface of the burial cave. But Nathan became bored, and he happened to have a hammer with him, and in his boredom began to bang on the floor of that cave, and lo and behold, it opened up a chamber. Now, the floor on which the boy was sitting and working actually turned out to be a fallen ceiling, and it revealed underneath an amazing cache of over 1,000 ancient objects. Skeletons determined to be from 95 different individuals, 125 objects of silver, 40 iron arrowheads, gold, ivory, glass, and other semi-precious stones. When the young boy went back to Dr. Barkay accompanied him back to that burial cave and recognized immediately the discovery as originating from the first temple period. So he immediately sent Nathan and all of the other young helpers, home. And he brought in a group of archaeology students from Tel Aviv University and also from the Institute for the Holy Land Studies on Mount Zion. And they began a 24-hour around-the-clock discovery of the site. Everyone was sworn to secrecy. They were not to tell parents, spouses, or friends. Eventually, a worker showed Dr. Barkay what she found was a purplish-colored object that looked like a cigarette butt, 1 inch long by about a ½ inch in diameter. A second one was also found, this one even smaller. They were 99% pure silver, but very brittle and wrapped into a thin, small scroll. Each of the two scrolls had a small hole in its center, and Dr. Barkay interpreted this as an indication that these were meant to be tied with a string and worn on the body, perhaps around the neck or the arm. They were amulets to protect the wearer against harm. Dr. Barkay was convinced there would be text inscribed inside the scrolls, but since they were so brittle, any attempt to unroll them would destroy them in the process. So for 2.5 years, Dr. Barkay and his team tried to find some way that these two scrolls could be unrolled. First, they were sent to the experts of the University of Leeds in Britain, to experts in metallic restoration. Unfortunately, they felt the danger to destruction were too great, and they returned them back to Dr. Barkay. Later, they were sent to a German laboratory, who also determined they were too brittle to be unraveled, and sent them back. In fact, there was no previous experience with unrolling such fragile objects as these. So for 3 years, the contents of the scroll remained a secret. Finally, the scrolls were sent to the Israel Museum Laboratory, where Joseph Shinar was responsible for devising some method to unravel them, and eventually came up with a new and innovative way to do so. He soaked the tiny scrolls in an acid solution to remove thousands of years of corrosion. Then the outer layer was carefully smeared with an acrylic emulsion to give it strength. When it dried, it was transparent and elastic. And so he then carefully unrolled the first layer, millimeter by millimeter, slowly and painstakingly over time, unraveled that scroll. It took 2 months before both scrolls were completely unrolled. And under a microscope, some writing could barely be seen, thinly etched into the thin silver surface. So now the challenge was, what did it say? When Dr. Barkay was shown the unraveled scroll, the first word he immediately recognized was the unpronounceable and private name of God. In Hebrew, the letters are Yod, He, Vav, He, and is known to us in English as Jehovah or Yahweh. In our English Bibles, the word is translated as the Lord because the Hebrew word Adonai was substituted for the unpronounceable name of God, and Adonai is my Lord. So what about the rest of the writing? What else did it have to say to us? In 1988, the scrolls were turned over to the Israel Museum in preparation for an upcoming exhibit. And Ada Yardeni, an expert in Hebrew paleography and the history of the Hebrew script, noticed something of the scrolls that others had missed. She noticed that in fact there were 3 occurrences of the private name for God in 3 consecutive lines. She reached out to a devout Jewish man who was well acquainted with the Hebrew scriptures, and he told her that the priestly benediction of number 6 was the only place in the Hebrew Bible that God's name appears in this manner. When pictures of the scrolls were taken in the late 1980s, the technology was not sufficiently advanced to permit a close examination of the epigraphic and paleographic details of the scrolls. However, time passes, and in 1994, high-resolution photos of the scrolls were taken by the West Semitic Research Project at the University of Southern California. And their findings confirmed the work of Dr. Barkay and his team on the biblical text, that the scrolls were in fact dated from the 7th century to the early 6th century before Christ, and are the priestly blessing text, known by Jewish faithful as the Birkat Kohanim. The scrolls bear a copy of the priestly blessing of Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 through 27, in which we read, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace." These scrolls are now currently on display at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. They predate the Dead Sea Scrolls by 400 years, and they are our oldest material evidence of any biblical text. How fitting that the earliest scripture that we have preserved is this beautiful blessing, said by Jewish fathers over their children at Passover and repeated in monuments and inscriptions around the world. Many Christians know these words as well. Dr. Barkay describes the significance and personal meaning of the scrolls for him. Let's listen as he tells us.
Blessing is, first of all, beautiful. The language is so beautiful, the Hebrew. It is lost in most of the translations. It starts with the blessing of God, and it ends with the word shalom. Shalom meaning perfection, meaning harmony between all components of creation. Today, for us, shalom is peace, but it is much more than that, the significance of that word. In any case, that is the ultimate peak of the aspirations of every believer. It is still in use in Jewish prayer, in Christian prayer, and on the high holidays, it is read in an enormous public next to the wall of the temple here in Jerusalem. It is used also in public ceremonies such as the inauguration of American presidents. The priestly benediction is said by Jewish fathers to their sons and daughters on the eve of the Sabbath, as they come home from welcoming the Sabbath. These are actually the first Hebrew words which I remember from my early childhood, the words with which my late father blessed me with. This is a kind of a closing of a circle for me. The text is a beautiful text, and it is also personally of importance to me.
So keep in touch with us. Like, subscribe, and all that. And share this with others. If you found it helpful, let me know. If there's things you would like to add to the discussion, feel free. I've also linked in the description below a number of resources that I have used for the production of this episode. Videos, scholarly papers, websites that discuss these things, all pertaining to this particular subject, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. Who knows what lies in the future, but we have plans to continue to bring to you these kind of discoveries of biblical text, and lots to do, very little time. Stay tuned for the next episode. I wish you well.